My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the metal handle, but I didn't care anymore. 4 hours. 4 hours sitting in that sterile waiting room with its gray walls and fake leather chairs, watching the clock tick past midnight while nobody told me a damn thing about my mother. 4 hours of Coraline squeezing my hand and repeating the same useless words. "Mom, they said it's normal. Major surgeries take time. They'll update us soon." But I knew better. I'd heard those exact lies 12 years ago when my father, Harold, died on an operating table in this same hospital, and I swore I'd never let it happen again. I pushed against that door with everything I had. The lock resisted for a moment, then something cracked, and it flew open. The surgical lights blinded me instantly, harsh and white. But before I could see anything, strong hands grabbed my arm and yanked me backward into the hallway. "Now don't, Vivian. Get out of here immediately. I'll explain everything later." It was Richard, my ex-husband, the cardiovascular surgeon who'd been operating on my 78-year-old mother, Eleanor, for the past 4 hours. His voice was low, urgent, almost desperate. That's what stopped me cold. Richard Ashford didn't do desperate. Richard did arrogant. Richard did condescending. Richard did cold professionalism, mixed with barely concealed contempt for everyone he considered beneath him, which included most of humanity and definitely included me after our divorce 8 years ago. But this wasn't that Richard. This Richard had panic written all over his face. His blue eyes were wide, almost wild, and there was sweat on his forehead despite the frigid air conditioning. His surgical mask hung loose around his neck, and his hands, those surgeons' hands that used to steady themselves for the most delicate procedures, were trembling visibly. "What's going on?" I tried to push past him, but hospital security had already arrived, 2 large men in blue uniforms blocking my path. "Where's my mother? What happened in there?" "Mrs. Ashford, you need to return to the waiting area." The older security guards spoke in that rehearsed, calm voice they teach them, like I was some hysterical woman instead of a 54-year-old CEO with a net worth of $42 million who'd built an empire from nothing and sure as hell wasn't going to be patronized by anyone. "Don't call me Mrs. Ashford. That's not my name anymore." I kept my eyes on Richard. "Tell me what's happening with Eleanor, right now." He opened his mouth, then closed it. For a second, I thought he might actually tell me the truth, whatever terrifying truth had put that look on his face. Instead, he just shook his head and turned back toward the operating room. "Give me 15 more minutes. Please, Vivian. Just trust me. Trust him. The man who'd cheated on me with a 28-year-old nurse during our 20th anniversary vacation. The man who'd walked out of our 22-year marriage for a woman young enough to be his daughter. Trust him with my mother's life when I couldn't even trust him with a dinner reservation. But what choice did I have? The security guards were still there, and Coraline had appeared at my elbow, her voice soft and pleading. "Mom, please, let them work. Dr. Chen said everything's going fine. They just hit a complication with the aortic valve, but they're handling it." Dr. Chen said that. I focused on my daughter. She was pale, her carefully applied makeup smudged under her eyes. At 29, she looked so much younger when she was scared. "When did you talk to Marcus Chen?" "About 20 minutes ago. He came out for about 30 seconds, said the surgery was taking longer than expected, but Grandma Eleanor was stable." Coraline glanced at Richard's retreating back. He seemed, I don't know, professional, calm, everything you want in a surgeon, right? Professional and calm. Unlike Richard, who looked like he'd seen a ghost. Or worse. The security guards escorted us back to the waiting room. I sat down on that uncomfortable chair and stared at the industrial carpet, counting the seconds. Coraline disappeared to get coffee neither of us would drink. I pulled out my phone and opened my contacts, scrolling to David Brennan. My corporate attorney handled real estate contracts, not medical malpractice, but he had connections everywhere. If something was wrong, really wrong, I needed documentation. I needed leverage. My fingers hovered over his name. It was 12:43 in the morning on a Tuesday, but David had told me 100 times, call anytime for anything. I pressed dial. He answered on the second ring, voice alert despite the hour. Vivienne? What's wrong? I'm at Boston Memorial. My mother's in surgery. Something's off, David. I need security footage from operating room 3. Can you make that happen? There was a pause. What kind of off are we talking about? The kind where the head surgeon looks terrified and won't tell me anything. The kind where I'm getting the same runaround they gave me when my father died here 12 years ago. My voice cracked on that last part, and I hated myself for it. Jesus. Okay, listen to me carefully. Don't talk to anyone else. Don't sign anything they put in front of you, and don't let them pressure you into any decisions. I'm calling Judge Morrison right now. She owes me 3 favors, and one of them is getting us access to those security feeds if there's any indication of negligence. Give me 40 minutes. Thank you. I ended the call and looked up to find Coraline standing in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee, staring at me. Mom, what are you doing? What I should have done for your grandfather, making sure that if something goes wrong, I have proof. I took one of the coffees, even though I knew I wouldn't touch it. Your father was acting strange, Cora. Really strange. And I'm not going to sit here and pray everything's fine when every instinct I have is screaming that it's not. She sat down next to me, setting her own coffee on the small table between the chairs. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. Then quietly, there's something I need to tell you. I was going to wait, but God, I can't keep this in anymore. Her hand moved to her stomach, a protective gesture I'd seen 1,000 times from other women, but never from my daughter. I'm pregnant. 3 months. Grandma Eleanor is the only one who knows. I was going to tell everyone tonight at dinner, that special dinner I'd been planning all week. She was so excited, Mom. She said it was the best news she'd heard in years. Everything stopped. The clock on the wall, my heartbeat, my ability to process anything beyond those 2 words. Pregnant. 3 months. Cora. I pulled her into my arms, and she collapsed against me, crying the way she used to when she was little and scraped her knee or lost her favorite toy. Except this wasn't a scraped knee. This was my daughter carrying my first grandchild, while her grandmother was maybe dying on an operating table because I'd trusted the wrong man with her life. She has to be okay, Mom. She has to meet the baby. She was already planning the nursery, talking about teaching them to read like she taught me, making all these plans. Coraline's voice dissolved into sobs against my shoulder. I held her tighter and tried to find words that wouldn't be lies. But I couldn't. Because the truth was, I didn't know if Eleanor would be okay. I didn't know what I'd seen in Richard's eyes. But it wasn't the confidence of a surgeon in control of a routine procedure. It was fear. Raw, desperate fear. 15 minutes passed, then 20. David called back. I've got Judge Morrison pulling strings. She's contacting hospital administration directly. We'll have access to the OR security feeds within the hour. Full audit trail of the surgery, including anesthesia logs and all documentation. If there's something to find, we'll find it. Thank you. I stood up, too restless to sit anymore. I need air. I'll be right back. Coraline nodded, wiping her eyes. I walked out of the waiting room and down the corridor, following the signs toward operating room 3. I wasn't going to try breaking in again, not with security watching. But I needed to see something, anything that would tell me what the hell was happening in there. That's when I noticed the observation window. It was small, positioned about 20 feet down from the main OR entrance, probably meant for medical students or supervising physicians. The glass was partially frosted, but not completely opaque. I walked toward it slowly, my heels clicking on the linoleum floor. I reached the window and looked through. My heart stopped. Eleanor was still on the operating table, still open, and there was blood. More blood than there should be. I didn't need medical training to know that. But that wasn't what destroyed me. It was what I saw, standing around that table. Richard had surgical instruments in his hands, but those hands were shaking so badly he looked like he had Parkinson's. Marcus Chen was next to him, pointing at something on one of the monitors, his face tight with what looked like barely controlled panic. And on Richard's other side was a blonde woman in surgical scrubs, someone I vaguely recognized as his fiancée, that French anesthesiologist Simone something. She was holding papers, documents of some kind, and she was talking to Richard in what looked like a heated argument while my mother lay there bleeding. This wasn't a surgery. This was a catastrophe being managed by people who were more concerned about covering their asses than saving a life. I pulled out my phone and started recording through the window. My hands were steady now, steadier than they'd been in hours. The fear had burned away into something colder, sharper. Fury. I recorded for 90 seconds before someone noticed me. Marcus Chen looked up, saw me through the window, and his face went white. He said something to Richard, who spun around and stared directly at me. Even from this distance, I could see his expression. Not anger, not embarrassment, resignation. Like he'd known this moment was coming and there was nothing he could do to stop it. I saved the video and turned away from the window. My phone was still in my hand when it buzzed with a call from David. "Vivian, we've got a problem. Judge Morrison just called me back. Hospital administration is stonewalling. They're claiming doctor-patient privilege and medical privacy regulations. We can't get the security footage without either your mother's consent or evidence of criminal activity." "I've got evidence." I sent him the video I'd just recorded. "Tell me what you see." A pause while he watched. Then, "Holy shit, is that Dr. Ashford operating?" "Yes, and unless I'm very wrong about what I'm looking at, he's operating while impaired. Those hands are shaking badly enough that I can see it through frosted glass from 20 feet away." I walked back toward the waiting room, my mind already racing ahead to the next steps. "Get that video to Judge Morrison. Tell her I have reasonable suspicion of medical negligence in progress. Tell her my mother is in immediate danger and I need access to those OR records right now." "On it. Vivian, be careful. If you're right about this, Ashford is going to fight back hard. He's got a reputation to protect and enough connections to make things very difficult." "Let him try." I ended the call and pushed open the waiting room door. Coraline looked up, hope and fear mixing on her face. "Any news?" "Not yet. But I need you to trust me on something. I need you to stay here, stay calm, and don't talk to anyone from the surgical team without me present." "Can you do that?" She nodded slowly. "Mom, you're scaring me. What did you see?" What did I see? I saw my ex-husband operating on my mother with hands that couldn't stay steady. I saw his fiancée arguing with him while a patient bled out on the table. I saw 12 years of trauma and loss and unresolved grief crystallizing into one terrible moment of clarity. I'd let this happen. I'd trusted the wrong people. Again. But I couldn't tell Coraline that. Not while she was carrying Eleanor's first great-grandchild and processing her own fear. So I just squeezed her hand and said, "I saw enough to know that we need to be ready for anything, and I need you to be strong for both of us right now." She nodded, blinking back tears. "I can do that." I sat down next to her and stared at the door, waiting for whatever nightmare was about to walk through it. Because one thing was certain. After what I'd just witnessed, nothing was ever going to be the same. Sitting there in that waiting room, staring at the institutional clock on the wall, I couldn't stop my mind from going back to this morning. Was it really only 14 hours ago? It felt like a lifetime had passed since my phone rang at 6:37 a.m., with Eleanor's number flashing on the screen. I'd answered immediately, already worried because my mother never called that early. She was a night owl, always had been, reading until 2 or 3 in the morning and sleeping until 9. "Mom, everything okay?" The voice that answered wasn't hers. "Ms. Ashford, this is Patricia Moreno, your mother's neighbor from 4B. I'm so sorry to call this early, but your mother collapsed in the hallway about 20 minutes ago. The ambulance just took her to Boston Memorial. She was conscious when they left, asking for you. Everything after that was a blur. I threw on clothes, grabbed my keys, called Coraline from the car. Your grandmother's in the hospital. I don't know what happened yet. Meet me at Boston Memorial as soon as you can. My daughter's voice had gone high and tight with panic, but she'd said she'd be there in 30 minutes. The drive took 18 minutes that felt like 18 hours. I kept thinking about the last time I'd seen Eleanor, just 3 days ago at Sunday brunch at her favorite place in Cambridge. She'd looked good, healthy, wearing that cream-colored blouse I'd bought her for her birthday and her pearl necklace, the one that had belonged to my grandmother. We'd talked about her book club, about Coraline's new case at the law firm, about the foundation gala I was organizing for November. Normal things, safe things. There'd been no warning, no sign that anything was wrong. When I got to the emergency room, they were already running tests. A young doctor with kind eyes and tired face explained that Eleanor had suffered an aortic dissection, a tear in the inner layer of the aorta. It's extremely serious, Ms. Ashford. We need to operate immediately. Without surgery, the mortality rate within 24 hours is extremely high. What are her chances with surgery? I'd asked, gripping the edge of the nurse's station so hard my knuckles went white. With immediate intervention by an experienced cardiovascular surgeon, about 70 to 80% survival rate for the surgery itself. But there are risks of complications, and the recovery is extensive. He'd paused, checking something on his tablet. The good news is, we have Dr. Richard Ashford here today. He's one of the best cardiovascular surgeons on the East Coast. Your mother's in excellent hands. That's when my stomach had dropped. Richard. Of all the hospitals in Boston, Eleanor had been taken to the one where my ex-husband worked. Of all the days of the week, she'd collapsed on the one day he was on call. Is there another surgeon available? I'd asked immediately. Anyone else who can do this procedure? The young doctor had looked confused. Dr. Ashford is really the best option. His success rate with aortic dissections is... I don't care about his success rate. Is there someone else? That's when Richard had appeared, walking down the corridor in his white coat with that same confident stride I'd known for 30 years. 30 years. We'd met when I was 24 and he was 28, both of us ambitious and hungry for success. He'd been completing his surgical residency. I'd been starting my first job at a real estate firm. We'd gotten married a year later, had Coraline 3 years after that. For 22 years, I'd believed we had a good marriage. Not perfect, but solid, built on mutual respect and partnership. Then came our 20th anniversary trip to Napa Valley. I'd found the text messages on his phone while he was in the shower. Can't wait to see you when you get back. Missing you already. From a contact saved simply as S. When I'd confronted him, he'd barely tried to deny it. Sharon Winters, a nurse in the cardiac unit. 28 years old, blonde, with a laugh that apparently made him feel young again. The divorce had been brutal. Richard had fought me on everything, tried to claim that half my real estate business was community property, even though I'd built it from nothing while he was establishing his precious medical career. It had taken 2 years and $300,000 in legal fees, but I'd walked away with my company intact and enough settlement money to never have to see or speak to him again unless absolutely necessary. And now here he was, the only surgeon available to operate on my mother. Vivian. He'd stopped about 5 feet away, maintaining professional distance. I just reviewed Eleanor's scans. She needs surgery within the next hour. I know this is complicated, but I'm asking you to trust that I will do everything in my power to save her life. Don't. I'd held up my hand. Don't ask me to trust you. Just do your job. His jaw had tightened, but he'd nodded. I need you to sign the surgical consent forms. Dr. Martinez will go over all the risks with you. That's when Coraline had arrived, rushing through the emergency room doors with her hair still wet from the shower and her shirt buttoned wrong. Where's Grandma? What's happening? I'd pulled her aside and explained everything while Richard waited, arms crossed, pretending not to listen. When I got to the part about him being the surgeon, Coraline had looked between us with that expression she'd worn so many times during the divorce, the one that said she was caught between loving us both and hating what we'd become. "Mom, I know this is hard, but he's really good at what he does. Everyone says so, and Grandma needs the best right now." She was right. I knew she was right. But there was something else, something I couldn't quite name, that made every instinct scream at me to find another option. Maybe it was just the trauma of my father's death 12 years ago, also at this hospital, also during what was supposed to be a routine cardiac procedure. The surgeon had nicked an artery, my father had bled out on the table, and by the time they'd told us what happened, he was already gone. Just like that. 1 minute I'd had a father, the next I'd had nothing but a body bag, and a hospital administrator apologizing for the unfortunate complication. Eleanor had been the one who'd gotten me through that loss. She'd held me while I cried, helped me plan the funeral, stayed with me for 3 weeks until I could function again. My mother had always been my rock, the one person who never let me down, and now she was the one who needed me to be strong. So I'd signed the consent forms. I'd watched them wheel Eleanor away on a gurney, her eyes closed, her face pale. She'd squeezed my hand as they'd passed and whispered, "I love you, sweetheart. Take care of my granddaughter. Not take care of yourself. Not, I'll be fine. Take care of Coraline." Like she'd known something I didn't. That had been at 8:45 in the morning. Now it was almost 1 a.m., and I'd just watched through an observation window as my ex-husband operated on my mother with hands that shook so badly he looked neurologically impaired. "Ms. Ashford," a voice broke through my thoughts. I looked up to see a woman in hospital administration scrubs standing in the waiting room doorway. "I'm Angela Torres, patient advocate. I understand you've requested access to surgical records and security footage?" I stood up. "That's correct. I'm afraid I can't authorize that without either the patient's explicit written consent or a court order demonstrating probable cause for medical negligence. Hospital privacy regulations. I have video evidence of Dr. Ashford operating with impaired motor function." I pulled out my phone and showed her the footage I'd recorded. "That's my mother on that table. Those are his hands shaking while he operates on her heart. Now tell me again about your privacy regulations." Angela Torres watched the video, her professional mask slipping just slightly. "I'll need to escalate this to our legal department immediately. Please wait here." She disappeared, and Coraline grabbed my arm. "Mom, what's going to happen?" "The truth is going to come out. Whatever Richard is hiding, whatever went wrong in that operating room, everyone's going to know." I sat back down, suddenly exhausted. "I just hope we're not too late." My phone buzzed. A text from David Brennan. "Judge Morrison is issuing emergency court order. Hospital legal team is cooperating. You'll have full access to OR records and security footage within 30 minutes. Be ready for what you might find." I stared at that last sentence. Be ready. As if there was any way to prepare for watching the man who'd once been my husband, the father of my child, potentially destroy the one person I loved more than anyone else in the world. Coraline leaned her head on my shoulder, her hand still resting protectively on her stomach. "Grandma's going to be okay, right? She has to be okay." I wanted to tell her yes. I wanted to promise that everything would work out fine, that Eleanor would wake up and hold her great-grandchild someday, that the nightmare I'd glimpsed through that observation window wasn't real. But I'd learned a long time ago that some promises are just lies wrapped in hope. So instead I said, "We're going to do everything we can to make sure she is. And if someone hurt her, if someone put their own interests above her life, they're going to pay for it. I promise you that." It was the only promise I could make, and I intended to keep it. 23 minutes later, Angela Torres returned with a laptop and 2 other people I didn't recognize. One was a man in his 50s, wearing an expensive suit. The other, a younger woman with sharp eyes and a hospital ID that read, "Legal Counsel." They sat down across from Coraline and me in a small conference room they'd moved us to, away from the main waiting area. Ms. Ashford, I'm James Whitmore, Chief of Hospital Operations. This is Rebecca Klein from our legal department. Judge Morrison's court order came through 15 minutes ago. We're providing you with full access to the operating room security footage and all associated medical records from your mother's surgery. He opened the laptop and turned it toward me. I have to warn you, what you're about to see may be disturbing. Just show me. My voice was steady even though my hands weren't. Coraline gripped my arm. James pressed play. The footage was crystal clear, multiple camera angles showing the entire operating room. I watched Richard and his team prep Eleanor, watched them make the first incision. Everything looked normal for the first 40 minutes. Professional, controlled. Then something changed. Richard's hands started shaking. It was subtle at first, just a slight tremor that he seemed to be trying to hide. But as the surgery progressed, it got worse. Much worse. I watched him pause twice, pulling his hands back and flexing his fingers like he was trying to get them under control. The other surgeon in the room, Marcus Chen, noticed. He leaned in and said something that the camera didn't pick up, but Richard shook his head sharply and continued working. Then came the moment that made my blood run cold. Richard was working on Eleanor's aorta, making what should have been a precise suture when his right hand jerked visibly. The surgical instrument slipped. Blood immediately began pooling in the surgical field, way more than should have been there. "Oh, God," Coraline whispered beside me. I couldn't speak at all. Marcus Chen immediately moved in, trying to control the bleeding. He was talking rapidly, pointing at something on the monitor. Richard pushed him back, his body language defensive, almost aggressive. They appeared to be arguing while my mother bled on the table between them. That's when the blonde woman, Simone Leclerc, Richard's fiancée, stepped forward with papers in her hand. "Can you turn up the audio?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. James adjusted something, and suddenly I could hear them. The sound quality was tinny, but clear enough. Marcus Chen's voice came through first, tight with controlled panic. "Richard, you need to let me take over. You're not steady enough for this repair." "I'm fine." Richard's voice was harsh. "I can handle it." "You just nicked the ascending aorta. She's losing blood fast. Let me suture it before—" "I said I'm handling it." Richard's hands were working, but they were still shaking. "It's just fatigue. It happens in long surgeries." Then Simone's voice, with that slight French accent. "Richard, we need to talk about the anesthesia logs. There's a discrepancy in the dosage I administered 30 minutes ago." Marcus turned to look at her. "What kind of discrepancy?" "Nothing that affected the patient's status. Just a documentation error I need to correct before—" "Before what?" Marcus's voice had gone hard. "Before someone notices you gave her the wrong amount?" The footage continued. I watched as Marcus Chen finally pushed Richard aside and took over the suturing, working quickly to repair the damage. But precious minutes had been lost. Minutes where my mother had been bleeding internally while the people who were supposed to save her argued about covering their mistakes. "Turn it off." I stood up so fast my chair scraped across the floor. "I've seen enough. Ms. Ashford, I want you to know that we take these matters extremely seriously," James Whitmore began, but I cut him off. "Do you? Because from what I just watched, my mother almost died because a surgeon with a tremor was operating on her heart, and when he made a catastrophic error, he was more concerned about his reputation than her life. And his anesthesiologist fiancé apparently administered the wrong dosage and tried to falsify records to cover it up. So tell me again how seriously you take this." Rebecca Klein, the lawyer, spoke up for the first time. "We'll be conducting a full investigation. Dr. Ashford and Dr. Leclerc have both been suspended pending the outcome. Dr. Chen will be interviewed as part of the process." "Suspended?" I felt rage burning through the shock. "They should be arrested. That's assault. That's criminal negligence. That's—" My voice broke and I had to stop, pressing my hands against the conference table to steady myself. Coraline was crying silently beside me. "Is Grandma going to be okay? After all that, is she going to survive?" James Whitmore's expression softened slightly. Your mother is in recovery now. The surgery was ultimately successful, but she's in critical condition. We won't know the full extent of any complications for at least 24 to 48 hours. She's in a medically induced coma to allow her body to heal. A coma. My 78-year-old mother was in a coma because the man I'd once loved, the man I'd trusted enough to marry and have a child with, had operated on her while his hands were shaking so badly he'd nearly killed her. I want to see her. Right now. It wasn't a request. They took us to the ICU. Eleanor looked so small in that hospital bed, surrounded by machines and tubes and monitors that beeped steadily. Her silver hair was spread across the pillow, her face pale and peaceful like she was just sleeping. But the breathing tube down her throat and the bandages covering her chest told a different story. I took her hand carefully, mindful of all the IV lines. I'm so sorry, Mom. I should have found another surgeon. I should have trusted my instincts. I let you down. You didn't let her down. Coraline stood on the other side of the bed, wiping tears from her cheeks. Dad did. And that woman. They let her down. They let all of us down. She was right, but it didn't make me feel any better. I'd signed the consent forms. I'd allowed Richard to operate even when every fiber of my being had screamed at me to find another option. A nurse came in to check Eleanor's vitals. She was kind, explaining each monitor and what the numbers meant. She's stable right now, that's what matters. We'll know more in the next day or two about her prognosis. After she left, Coraline and I sat in silence for a while, just watching Eleanor breathe with mechanical assistance. Then my daughter said quietly, I need to tell you something else, about Dad. I looked at her, waiting. I've been meeting him for coffee sometimes, once a month or so for the past year and a half. I know you didn't want me to have a relationship with him after the divorce, but he's still my father, and I thought... She trailed off, looking guilty. He told me he was having some health issues. Nothing serious, he said. Just essential tremor, a benign condition that runs in families. He said he was managing it with medication, and it wasn't affecting his work. He lied to you. I tried to keep the anger out of my voice. This wasn't Coraline's fault. Or maybe he believed it himself. Essential tremor isn't benign when you're a cardiovascular surgeon, and whatever medication he's taking, it clearly isn't working. I should have told you. Should have mentioned it when we found out he was operating on Grandma. Maybe you could have... Stop. I reached across the bed and took her hand. This isn't on you. Your father is a grown man who made his own choices. He chose to keep operating when he knew he was impaired. He chose his career over patient safety. That's on him, not you. My phone buzzed. A text from David Brennan. Need to see you ASAP. Got information about Ashford and LeClaire. Not good. Can you meet me in hospital cafeteria in 10? I showed the text to Coraline. I need to go deal with this. Will you stay with your grandmother? She nodded, settling into the chair beside Eleanor's bed. I'll call you if anything changes. I found David in the cafeteria, sitting at a corner table with his laptop open and 3 folders spread out in front of him. He looked up when I approached, and his expression told me I wasn't going to like what he'd found. Sit down, Vivian. We need to talk. I sat. Tell me. I had my investigator start digging the moment you sent me that video. Richard Ashford has been purchasing controlled medications from an unlicensed supplier in Providence, Rhode Island for the past 28 months. We're talking about high-dose propranolol, primidone, and some experimental compounds that aren't even FDA approved. He slid a folder toward me, filled with purchase records and bank statements. He's been spending anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000 a month on these medications, paying cash to avoid paper trails. He's been self-medicating. The pieces were falling into place. For over 2 years, while operating on patients. Gets worse. Simone LeClaire has falsified anesthesia records on at least 8 different surgeries in the past 6 months that we've found so far. She's been covering up dosage errors, administration mistakes, even one case where a patient went into cardiac arrest during surgery, and she documented it as a pre-existing condition. David opened another folder. We've got testimony from 3 different OR nurses who were too scared to report her because she threatened their jobs. I felt sick. How many patients were harmed? We don't know yet. Could be dozens, could be more. The hospital's legal team is going through records now, trying to identify every surgery where either Ashford or Leclerc were involved in the past 2 years. He paused. There's something else. The medication supplier Richard was using? Guy named Tommy Scalise, arrested 4 months ago by the FBI for running an interstate drug distribution ring. Richard's name came up in the investigation, but apparently he made a deal. Agreed to testify against Scalise in exchange for immunity from prosecution. Immunity? I stared at him. Are you telling me the FBI knew Richard was using illegal medications and they gave him immunity? For the drug charges, yes. But that immunity doesn't cover medical malpractice or negligence, and it sure as hell doesn't cover what happened to your mother tonight. David closed his laptop. I've already been in touch with the district attorney's office. They're opening a criminal investigation. Richard's looking at multiple felony charges, and Simone will likely be deported after she serves whatever sentence she gets. Good. I wanted them to suffer. I wanted them to lose everything the way they'd nearly taken everything from me. But more than that, I wanted to make sure they never hurt anyone else. What about Marcus Chen? I asked. He tried to stop Richard. I saw it on the video. Doctor? Chen filed 2 separate complaints with hospital administration about Richard's condition in the past 4 months. Both times, he was told to mind his own business, that Dr. Ashford was a valuable asset to the hospital, and his personal health matters were confidential. David's expression darkened. Apparently, Richard has some serious connections on the hospital board, political donations, country club memberships, all the usual ways powerful men protect each other. Chen's complaints were buried. Not anymore. I stood up. I want to talk to him. To Marcus Chen. Where can I find him? David checked his phone. According to the hospital directory, he's probably in the doctor's lounge on the 4th floor. But Vivian, be careful. He's going to be in a difficult position. He did the right thing trying to report Richard, but he's also facing potential liability for not going to the medical board directly. I'm not going to attack him. I want to thank him for saving my mother's life when Richard was too arrogant to step aside. I grabbed my purse, and I want to know everything he knows about how deep this corruption goes. I found Marcus Chen in the doctor's lounge, sitting alone with a cup of coffee he wasn't drinking. He looked up when I walked in, and I saw exhaustion and guilt written all over his face. Ms. Ashford, I'm so sorry. You should have been listened to when you reported him. I sat down across from him. That's what should have happened. Instead, the hospital protected him and put patients at risk. He nodded slowly. I've been thinking about resigning. I can't work in a place that values reputation over patient safety. Don't resign. Stay and help me burn it all down. I leaned forward. I need you to testify. About Richard's condition, about how the hospital ignored your complaints, about everything you've witnessed over the past few months. Will you do that? Marcus Chen looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, Yes, whatever you need. Your mother deserves justice, and so do all the other patients who might have been harmed because I didn't push hard enough. You pushed. They didn't listen. That's on them, not you. I pulled out my phone. I'm going to have my attorney contact you. He'll arrange for a formal deposition and coordinate with the district attorney's office. Are you prepared for the consequences? Richard has powerful friends. I don't care anymore. Marcus's voice was firm. I became a surgeon to save lives, not to cover up for colleagues who are putting patients in danger. Whatever happens to my career, I can live with it as long as I know I did the right thing. We talked for another 20 minutes. He gave me names of other staff members who'd witnessed Richard's deteriorating condition. nurses who'd seen Simone's mistakes, and board members who'd actively suppressed complaints. By the time I left that lounge, I had enough information to bring down not just Richard and Simone, but the entire corrupt system that had enabled them. When I got back to Eleanor's room, Coraline was still sitting beside the bed, holding our mother's hand. "Any changes?" I asked. "No." But the nurse said that's normal. She said sometimes it takes days for people to wake up from these kinds of surgeries. Coraline looked up at me. "Did you find out anything new?" I told her everything. About the illegal medications, about Simone's falsified records, about the hospital's cover-up and Marcus Chen's testimony. With each revelation, my daughter's face grew paler. "I can't believe Dad did all this. I mean, I know he's arrogant and selfish, but this is—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Criminal. That's what it is, and he's going to pay for it." I sat down in the other chair. "But right now, we focus on your grandmother. Everything else can wait." We stayed with Eleanor through the night, taking turns dozing in the uncomfortable chairs while machines beeped steadily and nurses came in every hour to check vitals. Somewhere around 4 a.m, I got a text from David. "DA filing charges first thing tomorrow morning. Press conference at 10 a.m. Hospital board calling emergency meeting. This is going to be huge." Good. Let it be huge. Let everyone know what Richard Ashford really was beneath the prestigious degrees and the impeccable reputation. Let the world see that the man who'd taken an oath to do no harm had nearly killed my mother to protect his pride. As dawn light started filtering through the ICU window, I looked at Eleanor's peaceful face and whispered, "I'm going to make this right, Mom. I promise you. They're going to pay for what they did." And I meant every word. At 7:30 a.m, while Coraline was in the bathroom and I was sitting alone with Eleanor, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Vivian, please don't hang up. I need to talk to you." Richard's voice was rough, like he'd been crying or hadn't slept, probably both. "You have nothing to say that I want to hear. Just give me 5 minutes, please. I'm downstairs in the parking garage. I'll lose my hospital access at 8 a.m. when the criminal charges are filed. And I need you to understand what happened before you go to prison? Before your entire world collapses the way you almost collapsed mine?" My hand was shaking with rage. "You operated on my mother while impaired. You nearly killed her to protect your precious reputation. What could you possibly say that would make any of that acceptable?" There was a long pause. Then quietly, "I'm dying, Vivian. The tremor isn't essential tremor. It's early onset Parkinson's. I've known for 3 years. The medications I was taking were a last-ditch attempt to keep working because surgery is the only thing I have left. It's all I am." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stood up, moving away from Eleanor's bed so she wouldn't somehow hear this, even in her coma. "You have Parkinson's disease, and you kept operating on people. I thought I could control it. The medications worked for a while, and my success rates were still excellent. Better than most surgeons half my age." His voice cracked. "But lately it's been getting worse. The tremor is becoming harder to manage. I knew I should stop, but I couldn't. Being a surgeon is who I am. Without it, I'm nothing. You're a father. You're a colleague. You're a human being who took an oath to do no harm." I was pacing now, fury making it impossible to stand still. "Instead, you chose to keep cutting people open while your hands shook. And when you made a mistake that could have killed my mother, you tried to cover it up instead of letting Marcus save her." "I know. God, Vivian, I know. I've been standing in this parking garage for an hour trying to figure out how to apologize, how to make you understand. And the truth is, there's nothing I can say. I destroyed everything. My career, my relationship with Coraline, any remaining respect you might have had for me. And worst of all, I hurt Eleanor, the woman who treated me like a son for 22 years, even though I never deserved it." I closed my eyes, trying to process this. Richard had Parkinson's. He was dying, slowly losing control of his body, and instead of accepting it with grace, he'd endangered countless patients trying to hold on to his identity as a surgeon. It was textbook Richard Ashford, putting his own needs above everything else. "What about Simone?" I asked. "Was she trying to help you cover up the Parkinson's?" "No, she didn't know. Nobody knew except my neurologist. Simone's mistakes were separate, her own failures." He sighed heavily. "She was trying to hide her incompetence because she's terrified of being deported. Her work visa depends on her medical license. If she loses that, she gets sent back to France. So she falsified records and endangered patients to avoid deportation?" "Yes. When I realized what she was doing, I should have reported her immediately. But I couldn't without risking my own exposure. We were both drowning in our own secrets, and instead of being honest, we pulled each other deeper." His voice broke completely. "I'm so sorry, Vivian. For all of it. For cheating on you. For the divorce. For what happened to Eleanor. For every selfish choice I've made over the past 10 years. You deserved so much better than me." I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to tell him that his apology meant nothing, that being sorry didn't undo the damage he'd caused. But another part of me, a part I didn't want to acknowledge, felt something close to pity. This man, who'd once been so confident, so brilliant, reduced to calling his ex-wife from a parking garage to confess his sins before being arrested. "You're right," I said finally. "I did deserve better. So did Coraline. So did Eleanor. So did every patient you operated on while hiding your condition." I took a breath. "But here's what's going to happen now. You're going to turn yourself in to the district attorney's office. You're going to plead guilty to every charge they bring against you. You're going to testify against the hospital board members who covered up Marcus Chen's complaints. And you're going to spend whatever time you have left making this right." "I will. I promise. Whatever I can do to help your case against the hospital, I'll do it." "I don't want your promises, Richard. I want your full cooperation documented and legally binding. My attorney will send you papers to sign. You'll waive all your rights to fight the charges, and you'll provide complete testimony about everyone who enabled your behavior." My voice was ice. "And if you ever want to have any kind of relationship with your daughter again, you'll tell her the truth about your diagnosis. She deserves to know her father is sick, even if he doesn't deserve her forgiveness." "Okay, yes, I'll tell her. Today." There was a pause. "Can I ask one thing? How is Eleanor, really? Still in a coma, still fighting to survive the surgery you botched, still the strongest woman I know, despite everything you put her through." I felt tears burning behind my eyes, but refused to let them fall. "If she dies, Richard, I will make sure your last days are spent in a prison cell, watching everything you built turn to ash." "I understand." His voice was barely a whisper. "Goodbye, Vivian. For what it's worth, you were the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm sorry it took losing everything to realize that." He hung up before I could respond. I stood there staring at my phone, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath my feet. Richard was dying. The man I'd once loved, the man who'd given me Coraline and 22 years of my life, was slowly being destroyed by a disease that was taking away the one thing he valued more than anything else in the world. But my sympathy had limits. He'd made his choices. He'd known the risks and operated anyway. And my mother was lying in a coma because of it. Coraline came back from the bathroom and immediately noticed my expression. "Mom, what's wrong? Did something happen with Grandma?" I looked at my daughter, this beautiful young woman who was carrying new life while processing the destruction of the father she'd been trying so hard to forgive. She deserved the truth, but it wasn't my truth to tell. "Your father called. He wants to talk to you. He has something important to tell you about his health." I took her hand. "Whatever he says, whatever you feel about it, I'm here for you. Always." Her eyes filled with tears. "It's bad, isn't it? Whatever he needs to tell me." "Yes, but you need to hear it from him, not me." I pulled her into a hug. I love you, sweetheart. Remember that, no matter what happens next. She nodded against my shoulder, and I held her tight. This child who was about to become a mother herself, while losing the father she'd fought so hard to maintain a relationship with. Life was cruel that way, giving and taking in the same breath. My phone buzzed with a text from David. DA filing charges in 30 minutes. Multiple felonies for both Ashford and LeClaire. Hospital board meeting starting now. Media is already gathering outside. This is going to be the biggest medical scandal Boston has seen in decades. I looked at Eleanor's peaceful face, at the machines keeping her alive, and felt something crystallize inside me. This wasn't just about my mother anymore. This was about every patient who'd been put at risk by a system that valued reputation over safety. This was about making sure it never happened again. The turning point had arrived. What came next would either destroy me or forge me into something stronger. I knew which one I was choosing. The hospital board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. in the executive conference room on the 12th floor. David Brennan had used his connections to get me a seat, not as a participant, but as an observer. They couldn't legally keep me out given that my mother was the victim at the center of the investigation. I walked into that conference room at 8:55 wearing my best Armani suit, the charcoal gray one I'd worn when I closed my biggest real estate deal 3 years ago. Power armor. I needed every advantage I could get because I was about to go to war with some of the most influential people in Boston's medical community. The room was already half full. Hospital administrators, board members, legal counsel, a representative from the state medical board. They all looked up when I entered, and I could see the calculation in their eyes. Who was this woman, and how much trouble was she going to cause? James Whitmore, the chief of operations I'd met yesterday, stood up. Ms. Ashford, I'm surprised to see you here. This is a closed meeting. My attorney informed me that as the daughter and medical proxy for the patient at the center of this investigation, I have a right to observe these proceedings. If you'd like to challenge that, we can bring Judge Morrison back into this and waste everyone's time with legal procedures. Or you can let me sit down and we can get started. I took a seat at the far end of the table before he could respond. The board president, a silver-haired man in his 70s named Harrison Cabot, cleared his throat. Very well. Let's begin. We're here to discuss the incident involving Dr. Richard Ashford and Dr. Simone LeClaire during the surgical procedure on Eleanor Montgomery 2 days ago. We've reviewed the security footage, the medical records, and the preliminary reports from our investigation team. He paused, adjusting his glasses. This is an extremely serious matter. Extremely serious? I couldn't stop myself from speaking. That's how you're characterizing medical malpractice that nearly killed my mother? As an extremely serious matter? Harrison's expression hardened. Ms. Ashford, you're here as an observer, not a participant. I'll ask you to remain silent unless directly questioned. Of course, wouldn't want the victim's family interfering with damage control. I leaned back in my chair but kept my eyes on him. Rebecca Klein, the hospital's legal counsel, opened a folder. Dr. Ashford has voluntarily surrendered his medical license pending the outcome of criminal proceedings. He's been formally charged with 6 counts of reckless endangerment, 3 counts of practicing medicine while impaired, and falsification of medical records. Dr. LeClaire has been charged with 8 counts of medical record falsification and reckless endangerment. She's also facing deportation proceedings. One of the board members, a woman in her 50s, spoke up. What about Dr. Marcus Chen? He was the assisting surgeon. Does he bear any responsibility? Dr. Chen filed 2 formal complaints about Dr. Ashford's condition in the past 4 months, Rebecca said carefully. Both complaints were reviewed by administration and deemed unsubstantiated at the time. Unsubstantiated. I couldn't stay quiet anymore. Or buried because Richard Ashford has been donating 6 figures annually to the hospital foundation, and you didn't want to lose that money? The room went silent. Harrison Cabot's face turned red. That's a serious accusation, Ms. Ashford. It's also true. David Brennan had entered the room behind me, carrying a briefcase. "I'm David Brennan, Ms. Ashford's attorney, and I have documentation proving that Dr. Chen's complaints were forwarded to 3 different board members, all of whom voted to take no action. Those 3 board members have collectively received over $1.2 million in donations from Dr. Ashford over the past 5 years, routed through various foundations and medical research funds." He started distributing papers around the table. "I also have testimony from 6 different nurses and 3 surgical technicians who witnessed Dr. Ashford's deteriorating condition and reported it through proper channels, only to be told to keep quiet or risk their jobs. This isn't a case of one doctor making a mistake. This is institutional corruption that prioritized money and reputation over patient safety." The board members were reading the documents David had provided, and I watched their faces change from defensive to worried to outright panicked. They knew what this meant: lawsuits, criminal investigations, federal oversight. The end of careers. Harrison tried to regain control. "These allegations will be investigated thoroughly. But I want to remind everyone that Boston Memorial has served this community for over 100 years with distinction. One incident, however regrettable, doesn't define our institution." "One incident?" I stood up. How many other patients did Richard Ashford operate on while impaired? How many people trusted this hospital with their lives only to be put on a table with a surgeon whose hands were shaking? How many of Simone Leclerc's documentation errors actually resulted in patient harm that was covered up? "We don't have that information yet," Rebecca Klein said quietly. "Then get it, because I'm not stopping until every single patient who was harmed by this hospital's negligence gets justice. I'm not stopping until every board member who took Richard's money and ignored the warnings loses their position. And I'm not stopping until this entire corrupt system is torn down and rebuilt with actual patient safety as the priority." My voice was shaking with rage. "My mother is lying in a coma because you people valued donations over doing the right thing. How many other mothers, fathers, sons, daughters are dead or permanently damaged because of your decisions?" Harrison stood up, trying to assert authority. "Ms. Ashford, I understand you're upset, but these accusations are documented, provable, and about to be very public." David pulled out another folder. "The district attorney is holding a press conference in exactly 43 minutes. She'll be announcing criminal charges against Dr. Ashford, Dr. Leclerc, and her office is opening an investigation into whether any hospital administrators or board members engaged in criminal conspiracy to cover up medical malpractice. I'd suggest you all get your legal representation lined up." The room erupted. Board members talking over each other, legal counsel frantically typing on their phones, administrators trying to figure out how to manage the crisis. I just stood there, watching the panic spread, feeling something that was almost satisfaction. Then my phone rang, Coraline's name on the screen. I answered immediately, my heart in my throat. "What's wrong?" "Mom, you need to get down here, now. Grandma's awake. She's actually awake and asking for you." My daughter's voice was thick with tears, but they were happy tears this time. I didn't say goodbye to anyone in that conference room. I just ran, David following behind me. We took the stairs down to the ICU, faster than waiting for an elevator. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst, but it was hope this time, not fear. When I got to Eleanor's room, she was propped up slightly in the bed, the breathing tube removed but oxygen cannula in her nose. Her silver hair was a mess, and her face was pale, but her green eyes, the same color as mine, were open and alert. Coraline was holding one of her hands, crying and laughing at the same time. "Mom," I whispered, walking slowly to the bedside like I was afraid she might disappear if I moved too fast. Eleanor turned her head toward me, a weak smile on her face. "Vivian, stop crying, sweetheart. I'm not dead yet." Her voice was hoarse from the breathing tube, but it was her voice, my mother's voice. I took her other hand gently, mindful of all the IVs. "You scared us. You scared us so badly." "I know. I'm sorry." She coughed, and a nurse immediately came in to check her vitals. Eleanor waved her off impatiently. "I'm fine. Just let me talk to my daughter and granddaughter for a minute." The nurse hesitated, but stepped back. Eleanor looked between Coraline and me, and despite how weak she obviously was, I could see her mind working. "Something happened during the surgery. Something bad. I can see it in your faces. Tell me." I glanced at Coraline, who nodded, so I told her everything. About Richard's Parkinson's disease, about his hands shaking during the surgery, about the mistake that nearly killed her, about Simone's falsified records and the hospital's cover-up, about the criminal charges and the board meeting I'd just come from. Eleanor listened to all of it without interrupting, her expression growing harder with each detail. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "That son of a bitch. I knew he was arrogant, but I never thought he was stupid enough to keep operating when he knew he was impaired." "Mom, language," I said automatically, which made both Eleanor and Coraline laugh despite everything. "I'm 78 years old, and I just survived someone trying to kill me on an operating table. I'll use whatever language I want." Eleanor squeezed my hand. "What are you going to do about it?" "Everything." I met her eyes. "I'm going to make sure he never practices medicine again. I'm going to expose every board member who protected him. And I'm going to use every dollar and every connection I have to reform the system that allowed this to happen." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Good. That's my girl. Never could stand watching you back down from a fight." She looked at Coraline. "And you're going to help her, right? Use that fancy law degree for something that matters?" Coraline wiped her eyes. "Actually, Grandma, I need to tell you something. I'm pregnant. 3 months. You're going to be a great grandmother." Eleanor's eyes went wide, then filled with tears. "Oh, sweetheart, that's the best news I've heard in years. Come here." She pulled Coraline into as much of a hug as she could manage with all the medical equipment. "You're going to be an amazing mother, and this baby is going to be so loved." I watched them together, 3 generations of strong women who'd survived everything life threw at us. In that moment, despite all the pain and betrayal and trauma, I felt something I hadn't felt in days. Peace. Not because everything was okay, but because we were still here, still fighting, still together. A doctor I didn't recognize came in, looking apologetic. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but we need to run some tests now that Mrs. Montgomery is awake. Can I ask you to step outside for about 30 minutes? We said our goodbyes and left Eleanor with the medical team. Out in the hallway, David was waiting with his phone. "The DA's press conference just started. You should see this." He pulled up the live stream. District Attorney Michelle Torres was standing at a podium surrounded by microphones. "Today, we are announcing criminal charges against Dr. Richard Ashford and Dr. Simone Leclerc for their roles in a pattern of medical malpractice and falsification of records that put dozens of patients at risk. Additionally, we are opening a grand jury investigation into potential criminal conspiracy at Boston Memorial Hospital involving senior administrators and board members who allegedly covered up complaints about Dr. Ashford's impaired condition." The reporters erupted with questions. DA Torres held up her hand. "We're also announcing the creation of a patient advocacy task force to review every surgery performed by either Dr. Ashford or Dr. Leclerc over the past 3 years. Any patient or family member who believes they were harmed is encouraged to contact our office. This investigation is far from over." David turned off the stream. "You did this, Vivian. All of this. You're the one who refused to accept their lies, who pushed for the truth even when everyone told you to back down. I did it for my mother, for Coraline, for every patient who's ever trusted a doctor and had that trust betrayed." I looked back toward Eleanor's room. "And I'm not done yet. Not even close." My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I opened it and felt cold run through me. It was from Richard. "I'm sorry. For everything. Tell Eleanor I'm sorry. Tell Coraline I love her. By the time you read this, I'll be gone. I can't face what's coming. I'm too much of a coward. Take care of our daughter. You were always the strong one. I stared at that message, trying to process what it meant. Gone. Was Richard saying what I thought he was saying? I called him immediately. The phone rang and rang, then went to voicemail. I tried again. Same thing. A third time. David, call the police. I think Richard is about to do something stupid. I was already running toward the elevator, Coraline behind me asking what was happening. We made it to the parking garage where Richard had called me from earlier. His car was still there, engine running, garage door closed. I pounded on the driver's window. Richard was slumped over the steering wheel, unconscious. David was already on the phone with 911. I tried the door handle. Locked. "Break the window!" I shouted. David grabbed a rock from the nearby landscaping and smashed through the passenger window. I reached in, unlocked the doors, and pulled Richard out onto the concrete. He was barely breathing, his skin gray. "Dad!" Coraline dropped to her knees beside him. "Dad, please stay with us, please!" The paramedics arrived within 3 minutes. They got Richard on a stretcher, started an IV, put an oxygen mask on his face. I watched them work, feeling nothing but numbness. This man who'd nearly killed my mother had just tried to kill himself rather than face the consequences of his actions. One of the paramedics looked at me. "Are you family?" "Ex-wife. His daughter is here." I put my arm around Coraline, who was sobbing. "Is he going to make it?" "We got here fast enough. He'll probably survive, but we need to get him to the ER immediately." They loaded Richard into the ambulance. Coraline climbed in with him, and I watched them drive away. David stood next to me in the garage. "You saved his life." "I saved Coraline from losing her father." I looked at him. Richard doesn't get to take the easy way out. He's going to survive, and he's going to face everything he did. That's the only justice that matters now. We walked back inside the hospital, and I realized the truth. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. The beginning of the real fight to change a system that had failed so many people. And I was ready for every single battle that lay ahead. 6 months later, I stood in the lobby of Boston Memorial Hospital, watching them unveil the new plaque. It was made of polished bronze and mounted on the wall right next to the main entrance where everyone who came through those doors would see it. "The Eleanor Montgomery Patient Safety Initiative," I read aloud, running my fingers over the engraved letters. "Established 2024, because patients deserve advocates who put safety above reputation." Eleanor was beside me in her wheelchair, looking elegant as always in a cream-colored dress and her pearl necklace. She'd insisted on wearing heels, even though the doctors had told her sensible shoes would be better for her recovering heart. That was my mother, stubborn until the end. "It's too much, Vivian. You didn't need to name it after me." "Yes, I did. You're the reason any of this happened. You're the reason I fought instead of accepting their lies." I squeezed her shoulder gently. Besides, they tried to argue for something generic like the Patient Safety and Quality Improvement Program. That wasn't going to work for me. Marcus Chen walked over, smiling. He looked different now, more confident. 2 months ago, he'd been named Chief of Surgery after the previous administration had been cleaned out. "Mrs. Montgomery, Ms. Ashford, thank you for being here today. This initiative is going to change how we practice medicine in this hospital." "Tell me about the new protocols," Eleanor said, always wanting details. "Every surgeon now undergoes quarterly neurological screenings. Any signs of tremor, impairment, or cognitive decline triggers immediate review by an independent medical board, not internal administration. We've also implemented a confidential reporting system where nurses and surgical staff can flag concerns without fear of retaliation. And every operating room has multiple recording systems that are reviewed randomly by external auditors." Marcus's voice was firm. "What happened to you will never happen to another patient here. I promise you that." "Good." Eleanor nodded approvingly. And the whistleblower protections. Strongest in the state. Any employee who reports safety concerns is legally protected from termination or retaliation. The hospital board voted unanimously to adopt the new policies. He paused. We've also settled with 43 patients who were harmed during surgeries where either Dr. Ashford or Dr. Leclerc were involved. Full financial compensation and public apology to each of them. 43 patients. 43 people who'd trusted the system and been betrayed. The numbers still made me sick, but at least they were finally getting justice. Where's Coraline? Eleanor asked, looking around. She said she'd be here. She's running late. Baby Vivian decided today was a good day to have a diaper emergency right before we were supposed to leave. I checked my phone and saw a text from my daughter. On my way. She's finally clean and happy. See you in 10. Eleanor's face lit up the way it always did when we talked about her great-granddaughter. Little Vivian Eleanor Ashford had been born 4 months ago, 7 pounds, 3 ounces of perfect health and her grandmother's green eyes. Eleanor had been there in the delivery room, still recovering from her own surgery but refusing to miss the moment. She's going to be such trouble when she gets older, just like her grandmother and great-grandmother. You say that like it's a bad thing, I teased. David Brennan appeared with a stack of folders. Vivian, I have the final settlement papers from the hospital lawsuit. $5 million to establish the Patient Advocacy Foundation, full funding for the Safety Initiative in perpetuity, and complete reform of the board oversight structure. You won everything you asked for. We won, I corrected. All of us. Every patient who came forward, every nurse who testified, every person who refused to stay silent. I took the folders. This is what happens when people stop being afraid and start demanding accountability. The hospital president, a woman named Catherine Rodriguez who'd been brought in after the entire previous administration had resigned in disgrace, joined our group. Ms. Ashford, I want to personally thank you for everything you've done. I know the process has been difficult, but the changes we're implementing will save lives for decades to come. I hope so, because if I ever hear about another case like my mother's, I'll be back, and I won't be nearly as patient the second time. I smiled, but we both knew I meant every word. Coraline arrived, carrying baby Vivian in a carrier, looking frazzled but happy. Sorry I'm late. Someone decided she needed an outfit change at the last possible second. She kissed Eleanor's cheek and then mine. Did I miss the unveiling? Just barely. Come look at your grandmother's plaque. I took the baby carrier from Coraline, lifting little Vivian out and holding her close. She was wearing a tiny dress that matched Eleanor's, something my mother had insisted on buying last week. Look at this, sweetheart. Your great-grandmother changed the world. Someday you're going to do the same. The baby grabbed my finger and squeezed, her green eyes bright and curious. I felt something settle in my chest, a peace I hadn't known was possible 6 months ago. How's your father? Eleanor asked Coraline quietly. It was the question we all danced around at every family gathering. Coraline's expression became complicated. He's stable. The suicide attempt left him with some brain damage, nothing severe but enough that he'll never practice medicine again. The Parkinson's is progressing. He's in a managed care facility now, and I visit him once a week. She paused. He asks about all of you. He knows he can't see you, that he doesn't deserve to, but he wants you to know he's sorry. Still, after all this time. Sorry doesn't undo the damage, Eleanor said firmly, but I'm glad you still visit him. He's still your father, even if he's a foolish man who made terrible choices. That was as close to forgiveness as Eleanor would ever get. I understood. I'd saved Richard's life that day in the parking garage, but I couldn't forgive what he'd done. Maybe someday, but not today. Not yet. What happened to Simone? Marcus asked. I heard she was deported. She's back in France, license revoked, facing criminal charges there as well. Apparently, the French medical board doesn't take kindly to doctors who falsify records. I shifted Vivian to my other arm. She wrote me a letter last month. Wanted to apologize, explained that she'd been desperate and scared. I didn't respond. Some apologies come too late to matter. We stood there together, 5 generations of consequences and redemption and hope. Eleanor in her wheelchair, still recovering but growing stronger every day. Coraline trying to balance new motherhood with rebuilding her relationship with a father who'd betrayed everything he'd once stood for. Baby Vivienne, innocent and perfect, representing all the possibilities we'd fought to protect. And me, learning that sometimes the only way to heal is to fight for something bigger than yourself. You know what the best part of all this is? Eleanor said suddenly. It's not the plaque or the new policies or even the settlements. It's knowing that when someone tried to silence you, you got louder. When they tried to intimidate you, you fought harder. That's the real legacy, Vivienne. Teaching your daughter and granddaughter that you never back down from doing what's right, no matter how powerful the people standing in your way. I felt tears pricking my eyes. You taught me that, Mom. You've been teaching me that my whole life. Then I did my job. She reached up and squeezed my hand. Now let me hold my great-granddaughter. I've been patient long enough. I placed Vivian in Eleanor's arms, watching my mother's face transform as she looked at the baby. 4 months ago, I'd thought I might lose her. I'd stood in that observation window and watched her bleeding on an operating table while the people who were supposed to save her argued about covering their mistakes. The rage I'd felt in that moment had nearly consumed me. But I'd channeled it into something constructive, into change, into making sure no other family would have to experience what we'd gone through. And now, watching Eleanor hold her great-granddaughter in the lobby of the hospital that had almost killed her, I felt something I hadn't expected. Gratitude, not for what happened, but for what came after, for the strength we'd found, for the changes we'd made, for the lives we'd saved by refusing to stay silent. She has your eyes, Eleanor said softly, tracing Vivian's tiny face with one finger. All 3 of you, the same green eyes. My girls. Coraline leaned her head on my shoulder. I hope I can be half the mother you both have been, half as strong, half as fierce. You already are, sweetheart. You stood up to your father when it mattered most. You chose what was right over what was easy. That's all any of us can do. I wrapped my arm around her. And this little one is going to have all of us to teach her how to be strong. She'll never doubt her worth or her right to demand justice. The hospital lobby was filling with staff and patients coming to see the new initiative launch. News cameras were setting up in the corner for the press conference scheduled in 30 minutes. This was going to be national news, a model for other hospitals to follow. From one nearly fatal surgery, we'd created a movement. David touched my elbow. Vivian, the reporters want to interview you before the formal press conference. Are you ready? I looked at my mother holding my granddaughter, at my daughter standing proud and strong beside them, at the bronze plaque that would remind everyone who entered this building that patient safety came first. Always. Yes, I said, I'm ready. Because this was what I'd learned in the 6 months since that terrible night when I'd broken down an operating room door out of desperation and fear. Sometimes the only way to protect the people you love is to refuse to accept the world as it is. Sometimes you have to break down doors and demand answers and fight against systems that put reputation above human lives. Sometimes you have to be willing to stand alone against everyone telling you to be quiet, to accept their explanations, to trust that powerful men know better than you do. And sometimes, if you're lucky and fierce and absolutely unwilling to back down, you win, not just for yourself, but for everyone who comes after you. I squeezed Eleanor's shoulder one more time, kissed my granddaughter's forehead, and walked toward the cameras. There was still work to do, still fights to win, still systems to change. But today, in this moment, we'd already done the impossible. We'd turned tragedy into transformation, and that was worth everything.